Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tastemakers podcast. We know there's too much TV. There's too much to keep track of. What's good? What's bad? What are people talking about? And then by next week, they're already talking about something else. That is where we come in here at the Tastemakers podcast. We are going to keep you up to date on the latest from the TV world and tell you what's worth watching, what's worth skipping. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and I am joined with my co-host, Grace Leeder. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing great. I'm ready. I watch a lot of TV, and some of it's good, and some of it's not good. It's bad. It's in fact bad, Taran.
A lot of TV is bad. Here's the thing.
Yeah.
I have been a lifelong TV watcher, like
Yes.
most people, but I've been quite dedicated to watching TV for most of my life. I've had like structured lists. I've kept
Mm.
track of what new shows air every single week. I've just done this for myself for a
Mm.
very long time to watch every possible show that's good, and it gets worse and worse and worse over time. It gets harder and harder to find the good stuff because there's so much more going on. And even worse, there's just too much mediocre stuff that comes out. It's
Yes.
like almost worth watching, but then you get stuck and then you just get lost. And so that's what we're here to hopefully help you do. We will all be watching the same things and discussing the same things, and it'll be a good time. I, of course, do a lot of podcasting for the show Big Brother on the reality side of things, but I also know scripted TV, and that's what we're here for, Grace.
Yes. Same. I've covered a lot of television over the past few years. Some of it incredible. I've been very fortunate to cover a lot of the Sunday night HBO prestige. I've covered a lot of prestige dramas, Taran, your Successions, The Last of Us, that sort of thing. I've also covered some very not good shows, but I still watch them all the way through because that's a bit of a problem I have. That I'll be like, maybe it gets good. You know those friends who are like, you got to watch the show. It just gets good after 7 episodes, and then you're like, that's 7 hours of my life that I have to spend doing that. We will not do that to people. We will tell you if it's bad and not worth watching, and I promise to check myself on that. Sometimes the show is just not worth watching. I'll keep watching it just to confirm it, and maybe surprise. Sometimes I'll come back and be like, "Hey, that is the end of the season 1 of that, random Apple TV Plus show got pretty good." But most of the time, I'll tell you can skip it. But there is a lot of great TV out there, Taran, and I actually think there's been some great TV in 2024 so far too.
Yes. So what this will normally look like is week to week, we will discuss the latest in TV releases, news. We'll talk about movies as well here and
Yeah.
there. But the purpose of this podcast is that hopefully you'll be able to listen week after week and be kept up on the latest from the TV and movie entertainment world. You'll be able to talk to your friends about what's happening, what new shows are out, what's maybe worth checking out, and what's not worth checking out. You'll feel smart. We all want to feel smart.
Yeah, there is this. I feel like such a common icebreaker question for me personally, because I do watch TV. And then I assume if you're listening to this, you also watch TV. Scripted TV in particular is like, what are you watching? And I feel like that's such a loaded question because you want to feel like you have something that there is so much to wade through. There's like every streaming service is coming out with, I think a few years ago, there was something like 600 new scripted television shows on air in the United States. That is way too many that any singular person could watch. But then, yeah, you don't want to waste your time watching something that was not good, not worth it. And I feel like TV is such a reflection of the cultural conversation, and there are these shows that hit. So I think that's the other thing too, is we're going to tell you whether or not we think you should watch it, but also to give you some of the talking points about like, why is this show resonating? Why is it important? And why you might want to be part of that conversation along with us. So yeah.
Yeah, like why is everyone talking about this show? Why are people freaking out about this show? We'll do the research so you don't have to. So what we are going to do in this particular podcast, this first podcast for the Tastemakers, is we're going to catch up on the year. We're approaching, we're about halfway through the year
Yeah.
exactly here in June, and so we're going to take a step back and talk about the best shows that we have watched that we feel have come out in 2024 so far. And then moving on from this podcast next week, we'll start talking about the latest releases and so on and so forth. But we want to get you started on some stuff that maybe you missed, maybe you didn't, maybe you skipped over it. Maybe you watched it and you also think it's really good. So
Yep.
that's what we're going to do here.
Yeah, this would be a good exercise, I think, too, for people to see what type of TV we are watching. And I think for the most part, I feel like we have our finger on the pulse of what I think has hit so far. But we shall see. But it will be a good indication of our choice of television and what resonates with us and what we're hoping will resonate with you folks. And hopefully there's some stuff on this list you haven't watched, because one of my favorite things is like I say, "Have you watched this show?" And they say, "No." And then I'm like, "Oh, it's amazing. You need to go watch." So that'll be the fun endeavor of today's activity, Taran.
Yes, and Grace and I have somewhat similar tastes in many things, but sometimes we also have different tastes, and so we may disagree, and that'll be, I think, good because you'll get to see two perspectives on a particular show. So, should we get started? Should we start talking about our top five? So you can, of course, watch this podcast if you would like on YouTube, on the We Know Scripted TV YouTube channel. It will be a video version of this podcast. We will occasionally include some graphics and images to help inform you of what we're talking about. If you prefer the video version, you can also see our faces, which, warning, I guess.
Graphic content.
But so you can go there. You can also, of course, listen on the We Know Scripted TV podcast feed. So without any further ado, let's start talking about our top 5 TV shows of 2024 so far.
Yeah. So, Taran, what I like about this is that we each made a list, and then I did some calculations to figure out like how they rank. It is very
calculations.
see people would
Yeah.
people wouldn't really understand the math. It's carry the one and whatnot.
Mhm.
But what I really like is that I think our lists, we do have similar tastes. Our lists do not match up at a single spot on the list. I think that's very fun. We didn't put a single show at the same position on the list. We do have a lot of overlap in our list, except at the top 5 position, where then there is a tie, and we immediately have to break the tie because we have 2 different shows that we put on. I'm going to give you the argument for what I put as my number 5 show, and then you can make the argument for why your show should actually be number 5, and we shall see where we come. I put True Detective Night Country as my number 5 show on the list. Came out in the new year, covered it over on post-show recaps. I really liked this show quite a bit. I love the ideas and the themes of this show. I like, it's an anthology series in the True Detective world, but with a totally new showrunner, Jodie Foster starring, Issa Lopez running. I loved the ideas and themes. I put it at number 5 because I do think sometimes, Taran, the writing, I was like, I'm just going to be okay with that writing. It's fine. I'm just gonna let that slide a little bit in terms of, because I think the story they were telling was so important. So I've put True Detective Night Country at number 5 on my list, which I think is the 5th best show of 2024 so far.
Yes. I didn't particularly care for True Detective myself. It was interesting because, so here's the deal. I actually, and this might immediately turn some people off, I watched True Detective season 1. Didn't really care for that one either, to be honest.
Well, that hot take. I love it. Hot takes.
Hot takes right away. It's not really my thing. Not really my thing. But horror is my thing. And so when I heard that this one was a little more horror themed, Jodie Foster's here, I was like, okay, I'm in. This sounds like a fun setting. And I did enjoy the first episode. But it was only 6, but it kind of drew out quite a bit for me. It was kind of like really taking its time. And I felt like, every episode ended on a cliffhanger that then didn't matter.
Actually, every episode ended on the same cliffhanger, was as someone radioing Jodie Foster, like, "Hey, Jodie Foster, we got something on in the over here," and then she'd go and see it, and they'd be like, "Oh no!" And then that'd be
Yeah, that was pretty much what happened. Also, didn't particularly care for the ending, but there is a show that I think deserves the 5th spot.
Okay,
it's in its 3rd season this year, and it's a show called Hacks. Hacks. It's a comedy drama, one of those. Honestly, leans a bit more on the drama than the comedy, but I do find it quite funny. And it's about this big like comedy star, and her like writer, ghostwriter-esque kind of position. And there's just a lot of like tension between the two of them. She's a very like abusive employer, and there's this very kind of like toxic but also sweet relationship between the two of them that you get to see play out over time. The first season was my favorite still, but I do think the third season is still going strong. I think that it's still funny. It's still a fun show to watch. So, Hacks season 3 was my number 5.
So I've heard of the Hacks popularity. I feel like a little bit under the radar, and I feel like every season that's so when season 2 came out, sort of the Hacks hive arrived. It was like people got to be watching Hacks, and then now it comes out in season 3. Interesting, they've done 10, 8, and 9 episodes of that series, which just bugs me symmetrically, but that's okay. I won't indulge the show. I went and started season 1 of Hacks. I've only watched season 1 of Hacks, so I can't put it on my list because I actually have not watched the third season. From what I watched from season 1, I very much enjoyed it. Gene Smart this is an Emmy-winning performance for this performance, playing Deborah Vance, this sort of like
Mhm.
she's sort of inspired by sort of an older generation of comedians. She has like this residency at a casino, and she's kind of just been doing the same thing for forever. And there's sort of this like shakeup in her life of this young writer. I really, really enjoy. I think it's really funny and really clever. It definitely is of the vein of those comedies recently that are sort of about people that you might not necessarily relate to in a degree, but you get sort of sucked into this world and sort of are endeared by them. And I feel like it does a really good job over the course of season 1 of explaining who Deborah Vance is, in a way that like defines why she is the way she is. And I can only imagine how much that is like built upon in further seasons. I know some of the storylines that are season 2 and season 3, the central premise. I think it's a great choice. I know many people who I also trust their opinions really, really adore this show. So yeah.
Yes. Well, we have to decide. One of these has to be our 5th place show. And I don't know. To me, it sounds like we're both a little like you like Hacks.
I do like Hack. I would say I think that probably here's where we could maybe make the tiebreaker, that I think probably Hack season 1 is a stronger season of television than True Detective Night Country
There you
season
go.
4. But I just have not watched Hack season 3 to be able to like put my what if it falls off? What if you're telling me it didn't fall
I
off?
can
So,
confirm it has not fallen off.
well, here's what we'll say then. I think we'll trust in the opinion of each other, and I shall take your advice, and we can put Hacks at number 5 on the list.
There
Because
we
I think
go.
I will enjoy Hacks season 3.
And for what it's worth, this is we will discuss our opinion, but we also want to take into account the
Yes.
general reception, I think.
Yes.
And what's interesting to me is that True Detective has had quite a polarizing response in the audience. I think that like my take on it was meh, kind of
Hmm.
some parts were good, some parts I didn't love, and it felt overall kind of mediocre at an average. But I think a lot of people either really liked it or really hated it. And so that was an interesting sort of experience for me watching the response.
And I think what I think you have to parse out in that conversation is that some of that critique was, I think, completely disingenuous, and then
Yeah.
some of it I think is totally fair. I think like the critiques you have of the show. I think there's a moment specifically in the finale that I'm like, oh wow, we really jumped from one thing to another just to get to that thing. But I think again, for me, the idea is what they're doing in the show, that it gets to be on television. She's actually going to be returning for season 5 of True Detective.
Ooh.
I believe that's been confirmed. So that's exciting to me. If this was like letting her sort of like hone her skills and to try again, I love it. I will report back to you, Taran, when I finish watching season 3 of Hacks. So I'll let you know, and then I'll yell at you for having put it at number 5 on the list. But that's okay.
Yes. All right. Well, let's move on then to our number 4 show on the list. At number 4 is a show near and dear to my heart, Fallout from Amazon Prime. Um, Fallout is a show that is based on a video game series, one that I love. I played a lot. I played a lot of Fallout 3. I played even more of Fallout New Vegas, and then I played a lot of Fallout 4, even though I didn't finish it because it got boring. Um,
Hopefully that's not
So
the trajectory of the show. Like season 1 was great, season 2, season 4. Oh, but
we'll see.
see.
We'll see. So I was really looking forward to this. I feel like if the Fallout universe is something that's hard to nail the tone of. It's very bleak and macabre while still being silly and sort of just kind of all over the place in terms of tone and humor. And I really feel like they nailed it. The tone, the setting, all worked really well. Um, I had a really fun time watching the show. It's just a fun watch. I think my only complaint was that like there were a couple of storylines that I felt like didn't quite match up to the rest. But that was not enough to knock it down too far. It's just a good time. It's just if you are able to stomach violence,
Yeah, it's very
this is
much
a
in
show
the
that you'll enjoy
Amazon
watching.
vein of like, not maybe not The Boys level, yeah, but there's some stuff in this show.
I would
Uh,
say The Boys is a pretty close comparison in
I would
terms of
agree.
tone.
I would agree. All right. Well, you said it was near and dear to your heart. It was a little near and dear to my heart, apparently. Even though I'd never played the video game, I put it at number 3. You put it at number 4, so that's where it winds up on this list. Never played Fallout. A bit familiar with sort of the concept of the premise, but enough that even as I was watching it, I realized I had some of the information I thought about the video game wrong. I really fell in love with the world, and I thought that they told a really compelling story within that world. My favorite thing is certainly, as you were talking about, is the tone. This idea that it's quite brutal and violent, but there is this mask of sort of 1950s aesthetic, the sort of post-war tone of like America won the war. It's all fine. We're good. Don't worry about anything. Even though, if you actually live in the 1950s, for a lot of people, it was not perfect. It's not idealistic. So putting that sort of, wallpaper on the whole thing, I thought it's just incredible, and that's from the game. I feel like then they adapted it so much, so well. And Ella Parnell, who for me broke out from Yellow Jackets, but you also have, I think, Walton Goggins being, just this kind of amazing enigma in the show, and the fact all the people in the show, because of the design of the show, had so much room to sort of play it is silly and serious in a way that I often like from my show. So I really, really was endeared by Fallout. And the episode already been renewed for another season, and there's lots of indications as to what's coming. It also, I think it's interesting because I believe the weekend after it dropped, it had Fallout had its highest amount of people playing it on Steam ever.
Mhm.
So certainly when you're looking at things like there's this, I think, thing in our society right now about like IP driven content. And on one hand, it's like we don't always need to be IP driven, but also then you can totally understand why Amazon Prime was probably pretty excited to like have Fallout be a success on their streaming platform. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that what we will find is that quite a few of the shows on our list so far are adaptations, which is a trend that some people don't like. I personally really enjoy adaptations. I even when they're not great, just I like sort of analyzing the process of what they've decided to adapt, what they've decided to take, remove, change, alter. Fallout is not adapted in terms of its story. It's just a new story that's taking a bunch of things from the games, um, and using them as reference points for the most part. It's taking the world, and it, I believe, is supposed to be like canon in the universe, which I think has been slightly controversial in the Fallout world. But the story itself is completely fresh, and you don't need any prior Fallout knowledge to watch the show. So definitely worth checking out. Again, as long as you're okay with, like, a good old taste of ultraviolence, I would say.
Yeah. Well, they're pretending that they're like like there's whistling and jaunty 1950s music. Yeah. All right. Number 3 on our list. So we are at the halfway point here. I think is one of the shows that created the most conversation in
Mm,
2024 thus far. This is Netflix's Baby Reindeer. Baby Reindeer is was created and stars Richard Gadd, who is a comedian, and he actually based the show on his one-man show that he created. And we won't be spoiling the show here, but the general idea, very early on, you learn that this is a man who is being like harassed slash stalked by a woman. And I feel like there is more to that in terms of why, even in some ways, he maybe is letting it happen. I think that that's sort of the most I want to give in terms of a premise. It has created an enormous amount of conversation, Taran, because it is based on a true story. Although I say based on a true story, they decided to put "this is a true story" at the start of the show, and thus people have been internet sleuthing to figure out who is represented in the show. There are some concerns about whether or not the show did a good enough job at hiding people's identity. The one of the people depicted in the show has sued Netflix for, I think, millions of dollars at this point, and has gone on Piers Morgan and done a full interview, which is also fascinating.
Wild.
But I thought this show was an insight into something that doesn't get talked about a lot in television. Was really well done, and then it's kind of the fun thing of like it also spurred on this like conversation piece for a thing that I think, if we're just talking about Fallout, which is a thing that so many people have played, nobody really knew that this was coming. The show Baby Reindeer, Taran.
This show blew me away. When I first heard of it, I was like, oh, it seemed like it was going to be just mostly comedy. That was my initial
Yes.
impression.
Yeah.
And it is a comedy to a degree. But definitely even more so leaning on the drama aspect, way more so than even Hacks. Um, and then I started hearing, and I put it on my list. I was like, that's an interesting concept. It'll be cool to see a story being told from this perspective of like a man being stalked by a woman. You don't really
Mhm.
get that a lot represented. And then I started hearing like, oh boy, this show. Like
Yeah.
this is a wild ride. And I was like, really? Okay. The thing about Baby Reindeer for me is that every step of the way on the journey, it took me somewhere I didn't expect to go. And I, having watched a lot of TV by
Mhm.
now in my
Mhm.
life, I struggle to find shows that bring me the same feeling that I had when I was a kid and I was watching like an episode of a show and I was like, I need to watch the next one. Like, not because they've cut off the ending and I need to see the ending of the cliffhanger, but because genuinely I'm just like, wait, what could possibly happen next? And I'm just like addicted to watching this show.
Mhm.
That's what Baby Reindeer did for me. I don't know if it will do that for other people, but like it was such an addicting experience to just go down this rabbit hole of like watching the car crash that was his life at this time. And on top of all of that, it really made me think a lot about his circumstance and the way that he behaved and my own preconceptions about a man being stalked by a woman and the way that he might behave in that situation and the motivations behind it. And it really was like a gut check for myself watching and thinking about the way that I'm responding to him into the situation. It was really, really, really good. I really would recommend it. Again, this is one where like I would potentially warn people if you've been in any kind of similar situation. I've heard that this can be triggering for you because it feels very real because it is a real story. I guess allegedly. And
Mhm.
and so you might want to be careful of that. But like if you have any sort of curiosity for this, definitely I recommend giving it a shot.
Yeah, I think it's the most unique show of the year. I don't think there's anything. I don't think I've seen anything like this in particular. I think it's a very fascinating story. I think what's so interesting to me is I definitely think those conversations that the show kind of forces you to have about the choices that this individual makes over the course of the things that are happening to him, or that then as a result of the decisions he makes, is a really interesting thing to think about in terms of what would I do if I was in that situation. It delves on so many different things in the span of 7, episodes, that I think that's quite impressive. I'm really interested in what Richard Gadd does next, because you would presume that he doesn't necessarily have the same sort of like trauma-induced story that he can pull from his own experience. If he does, I feel very bad for Richard Gadd. But I'm so intrigued to think about what he creates and comes up with next. It might be season 2 of Baby Reindeer because of all the stuff that's been happening in
Yeah.
real life, with the lawsuits and whatnot. But we shall see. Really love Baby Reindeer. I believe. I know your list could be a little bit in flux at times, but at times you had it at number 1 on your list.
Yeah, I mean, when I watched it, it was definitely my favorite thing I've seen. I think it's the most consistent show I watched. It never had any, for me, moments of dullness or like, there was never a moment where I didn't want to watch an episode of Baby Reindeer. I was just like, I just wanted to consume it all. And also, Richard Gadd, one of my favorite narrators. I
Yeah.
love his narration, his voiceover. There's such an urgency to it. It's just, I really enjoy it. Okay, that was number 3.
That was number 3.
There's 2 shows left, Grace.
I
Only
feel
2.
like at this point, people are being like, "But there's more than 2 shows that I liked from this year." So that's my favorite. We have taste, and they might not line up with yours, but we'll see. Not you,
Mm,
the audience listening, but
yes. Well, I imagine at this point, if you're listening in real time and not going back, and you know what shows are available, you're probably expecting at least 1. You're probably thinking, "Well, I know why I'm ahead of these 2. I know what's coming."
that's
There's
because you jumped
1
ahead in the
show
YouTube video. No,
that they're
yeah.
definitely going to talk about. And we are at number 2, Shogun. Fantastic show. Shogun, really, really fun. This was like, I think, pitched to me in terms of what I saw as like, hey guys, it's the new Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
it gives that energy. And I know that every show and its like mother, I guess, wants to be the new Game of Thrones. Um, and this is not the new Game of Thrones. It is quite a distinctly different feel, I would say. It's definitely a more focused story, with a smaller cast of characters, but it does have that kind of like historical epic feel, that I think a lot of people are looking for, and it feels well done. It feels expensive and real, in a way that like a lot of other like fantasy shows or even like epic historical dramas sometimes fail to do. This is also adapted from a book, called Shogun, and I believe it's fairly accurate. I actually did attempt to read the book,
Mhm.
kind of fell off of it. This is the thing. I also read a lot of books, and I've just like with shows, I've gotten a lot better at like not continuing if it's not quite compelling for me. So I was actually very excited for the show, hoping that it would be my way of consuming the story without having to read the book, which just didn't quite mesh with me. And it was exactly that. I really enjoyed watching. It was a really good time. And I think that this can appeal to a lot of different people. Also, a bit violent at times, but not quite in the same way as like a Fallout.
Yes, I mean, I think that the Game of Thrones thing is like totally fair. I feel like it has elements of Game of Thrones, certainly the like time period, even though one is fantasy and one is real life, Shogun being real life, though there are no dragons, as far as I'm aware in Shogun. But
No
the
dragons,
other
but some cannons.
That's right, there are some cannons.
Mm.
I think that for me, the Shogun aspect is the very, like, political thing of who so the idea of a Shogun is that in Shogun, is that the emperor has died and his, son, his living son, is too young to really rule. So there's sort of this council in place, and then a Shogun being sort of like a military ruler who takes over, and rules, and so the idea is, like, whether or not someone can be Shogun. And it really resolves. I think the big difference is that it really revolves around one character, like one sort of important Japanese figure, with I feel like everybody else sort of supporting that narrative, as opposed to Game of Thrones, which I do feel like is a fair bit more sprawling. But in
Mhm.
terms of you know character death and the maneuvering and that sort of strategic thing, I think it definitely it doesn't owe anything to Game of Thrones because Shogun was written before Game of Thrones, but in terms of as a television show, it feels in line with that. My one piece of Shogun that I would say I didn't rate it higher. It's number 2 on our list, which means like collectively we both rated high. I think I had it 2 and you had it 3. The piece for me is that I had to restart the show. So I watched it one time and felt like I was like not quite getting it. And that sometimes can just be like you're not quite in the right mood for a particular show. But I,
Mm.
I had to go back and restart it. And then once I was like in it, I was like, okay. And there is a moment about halfway through that I do think for me, I was like, oh yeah, this show is amazing. I literally went on a trip and I remember talking with someone and we were both like, yeah, we're on the same episode of Shogun. We really want to watch the next one, but we're like traveling. This was when I went to Chicago for RHAP, and like I'd be like, it's poor form probably to go back to my hotel room and just watch an episode of Shogun, but I really wanted to. Really wanted to. So I really liked it. It also has been renewed for season 2, which I think is very interesting because I think as the show is happening, it's based on one book. There are a lot of other books written by the same author, James Clavell. Who he has other books in sort of different time periods, different things, and it does feel like the show has a bit of a definitive ending that it's very intriguing as to the fact that it's been renewed. But I really adored Shogun. It did feel epic and big and fun. This is one of only 2 shows because we put Hacks on the list that it was a weekly release, and I feel like I think that certainly helped it. I think the show is still a hit. It's just as good if it drops in a binge, but there's a lot going on that I think was like worthy of a weekly release for the show. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that it took you a sec. Did you go into the show expecting it to be really good and complex?
Yes, I think I was a little bit later. Like I the show hadn't finished when I had been told of how good it was. Also, I feel like there was a lot of marketing and promo around the show, and then I feel like there was this buzz about it either through social
Mhm.
media or people that I chat to about television. I definitely did have expectations, and so then I think that first episode, and maybe we're just doing the exact same thing to our poor listeners. We're going to go in with high expectations and then watch episode 1 and wonder whether or not is this really as good as they say it is. I do think it's a show that I still think the first episode is great, but there's a lot going on. It's obviously almost half, if not more times in Japanese. So it's a subtitled show that you're watching,
Mm.
but I think it's great. The character work in the show is quite astonishing. It's quite good. So yeah.
Yeah, because it's interesting because I think I was definitely ready for the show. Like, it was a time where I was like looking for what's the next show that I'm going to be watching. And so when it came on, I was very prepared, and I also had read part of the book, so I think maybe that helped, sort of like get me in the right headspace for it. Honestly, the biggest thing for me that took me a second was that the lead actor, I was just like, he's not Tom Hardy, but he
This is
seems like Tom Hardy. Oh, maybe
this is
he's that guy
yeah.
from the movie that seems like Tom Hardy, but he's not Tom Hardy, the one where he had, like, the machine in his brain. And then he also wasn't that Tom Hardy either. He was a different guy that also seems like Tom Hardy, and it was too many Tom Hardys, and I was very confused. I like the guy, though. He's very cool.
This is Cosmo Jarvis, who
Cosmo
he just
Jarvis.
kind of been in. He's been in one of our favorites. He's been in Raised by Wolves. He's in Peaky Blinders. He's just been in a bunch of stuff. But I think this is certainly you would call it his breakout role as
Mhm.
not Tom Hardy, but Cosmo Jarvis, an amazing name unto itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, the only reason I had it a little bit lower is that, for me at least, it never quite reaches the heights of, like, the epicness of like a Game of Thrones or the kind of show that I would like to watch in this vein. And there were some episodes that felt a little slower than others, but I really just feel like I think a lot of people. I think this show has a wide appeal. As long as you're willing to read subtitles, I guess. But honestly, the subtitles and the translation aspect of the show was one of my favorite parts of it. The different ways that things were interpreted
Right.
and the different meanings that that had was, I think, my favorite actual aspect of the show. I'm somebody that really enjoys the strategic political maneuverings. Obviously, talk about strategy on Big Brother constantly.
Yeah, for real.
Um,
Yeah.
so I liked that part. That's where like I think it's perfectly satisfying. I don't think it like quite scratched the itch for me, but the character work and the theming and stuff like that really did. So yeah, I definitely would recommend checking out Shogun, and widely appealing. I think, like I said, has largely been applauded by audiences. They all really like Shogun, so I think it's a pretty safe recommendation.
And somehow it's number 2 on our list. Taran.
Yeah. Okay, so Grace, Shogun was number 2.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for number 1? Well, I don't know. It might be a little bit of a stretch. It's a show that I think both of us really enjoyed.
Yes.
It's, I think, a bit more niche than some of the others, but if
Super
it
niche.
hits, it's gonna really hit. I think maybe a little bit surprising, but our number 1 show. No, it's
No, it's not X-Men.
our
It's
number
not
1
X-
show is not X-Men. For the listeners, the X-Men
I think
thing just came on the screen.
I
That
think
was
we've been
not.
tampered by our executive producer Josh Wigler. This is number 1 show of the year. Yeah.
After 10,000 years, I'm free. It's time to conquer the Tastemakers. That's right.
All right, okay. Listen, this is Josh.
Yeah.
He is behind the scenes. He is
Yeah.
our producer on
I'm
the
the
show.
monster in the basement.
He has
Can't
been in
put me
control of the
down.
images, but Josh, you're not allowed to just throw in random
Yes.
shows.
Yes, I am. I don't know if you looked at my new bio on robhasawebsite.com. It says executive editor on it,
Wow.
which means I've got a shit ton of power, certainly over this scripted TV feed. X-Men 97 is the number 1 show of the year. What are you both talking about?
Listen, I watched a few episodes. I watched up until the one everyone was going like, "Whoa!"
No
over,
spoilers.
and I was
yeah.
like,
Remember it. Yeah.
I don't know.
You weren't an
Okay.
X-Men kid you didn't do the 90s X-Men
I mean,
cartoons.
that's the thing. I wasn't deep into it, but I watched
Yeah.
the show. You know,
What's
like, it
ironic
was
is that he does
nostalgic
have
for me to
mutant
watch
powers,
this.
but he wasn't an X-Men.
What is everyone's respective mutant power, do you think, here on the pod? I told Taran what mine was offline earlier today.
I was gonna say,
I always liked the speed characters.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You're fast?
Yeah.
Are you actually fast?
I mean,
Who would win in a foot race? You, Puya, or Mike Bloom?
oh, definitely me.
Amazing confidence. My superpower is definitely gender bending.
Yeah, that's definitely it.
Yeah,
you got it.
obviously. I changed my whole
Locked down.
gender.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
F that, There's nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, can I tell you, Josh Wigler? I knew that we were doing this, and I felt quite bad that neither Taran and I had X-Men 97 on our list. I had watched the first, I think, 3 episodes, and like Shogun, I was like,
Right.
I don't know. And I went back and I rewatched it, and I watched the whole thing, and I definitely felt like I got more into it. But my hot X-Men 97 take is that it's actually extremely similar to Josh. If I if I got you to watch pro
Can't make me
wrestling,
do anything.
okay? It's
Let alone
very,
keep me off your podcast.
but there's a pro wrestling aspect to it. There's so much lore in the show that I feel like it's similar to like the years and years worth of pro wrestling. That when you're watching it, something happens. You're like, why that? Like if I was watching with you, you'd be like, why'd that happen? I'd be like, all right, well, 7 years ago, like this person betrayed this person, and then this happened, and now we're here, and then this match is happening because of this thing, and they're fighting for a title, and it's a ladder match or whatever.
So you needed like the superhero origin story for the X-Men.
I don't.
Yeah.
Need this. No, here's no.
Taran needs it.
I
Taran, you need the X-Men to hold your hand. Is that what you need?
No, this
Grace, go ahead.
every show doesn't need to be for every person, and this show is appealing in a phenomenal way, and is people are loving it and really attracted to it for people who. Not only people who didn't watch the thing, but then can dive into all of the things. Like there's a world where I get so sucked into this. I'm like, I got to watch all the original series, and I'm going to start buying the comic books and read them. And then the show is immensely rewarding for that person. In the same way, I don't want wrestling to be more like, okay, explain everything that happened in this thing. I want it, the more that it's fun for it to be like, oh my God, this thing is happening because I've invested all my time and energy into watching this thing, the more rewarding it is. So I don't need X-Men to be more for me. If I want to resonate more with X-Men 97, I can go back and watch all the animated shows and get to the comics and read all the wikis. And then I'll watch it and be like, that's that character for in 2 seconds clip.
Yeah,
but it's really working.
You do that. I recommend you do that, Grace, because to your point earlier in the podcast, once you start, whether or not it's good or bad, you'll finish it, and it's going to be excellent,
true.
and you're going to be so happy that you finished it. You're going to become like the hugest X fan on RHAP, and it will be an incredible thing. I cannot speak for it from the point of view of having no nostalgia for X-Men 97, because I grew up on this show. I grew up on the original X-Men 1990s cartoon. It is a humongous reason. I talk about like a bunch of the different influences that have brought me into your ears. X-Men 97 and where it comes from, that original 90s X-Men run, is a huge one of those touchstones for me. I was such a Wolverine fanboy. I thought Gambit was the coolest. The whole lineup, the iconic opening music, week in, week out. Saturday mornings was what I looked forward to most because X-Men was going to be on my screen. And I was really surprised at just how excited I was that X-Men was coming back because, and I'm sure this would be a fun topic to explore in the future, is what's up with Marvel right now? And, you know, I'm a huge Marvel guy, and my enthusiasm for it, much like a lot of people's, I think, has been a little lower than it had been in years previous. And then the promise of X-Men 97 just around the corner kind of got that hope alive back in me. And those first few episodes are nostalgia bombs, but they are loaded with incredible modern animation and modern storytelling sensibilities, but it is still so rooted in that 90s nostalgia that when you get to this threshold episode that I would not dare spoil for anyone, but has an astounding amount of jarring plot twists for fans of the X-Men, that it completely weaponizes your own nostalgia against you in a way that I've very rarely seen TV do. Twin Peaks: The Return is like the closest comp for me, and that is high praise to connect X-Men 97 to David Lynch for me. So I can only speak from the perspective of somebody who was so attached to these characters, to watch how they evolved them, the types of stories they were telling that felt really, really relevant to now. And there was basically no other show this year that I refused to look at social media or anything until I watched X97. Like, I just would not let this show get spoiled for me. So I know it wasn't on your list, but I had to come on here and just give you my number one show of the year because I'm producing the podcast behind the scenes. I couldn't watch it happen.
Yes, and Josh may be popping in time and time again to give some thoughts or maybe crack a joke here and there. But yes, I mean, when it comes to X-Men, for me, like I got to the threshold episode, I watched it, and I saw that it was good, but I didn't experience it as good because I just wasn't connected. And this is coming from somebody, I watched all the movies. I did watch the cartoon when I was a kid, like here and there. I did have some nostalgia when I saw like the opening theme and stuff, but just like there's so much history that I think they are leaning on. That I agree with Grace. I think that like this is the kind of show that if you are invested, if you are in that universe, this is really going to hit for you. I can tell based on the quality of it, the way that it's made, and the response to it. But unless you're willing to commit all of that, you know, I'm just not sure it's gonna do much for you.
And I think Marvel should take a lesson from this, that like when you were like, oh, you want more of the origin story stuff. Like I'm not actually arguing for that, because I think that what this is like a thing that you can so dive into. And like, if you fall in love with X-Men 97, it's the first thing you can do. There's so much opportunity for you to dive in. Hey, Josh, you want me to zing Taran real quick? Taran, you didn't like X-Men 97. What were you expecting? Black leather? Did you get him?
You did. Yeah, actually, yeah. Wow. See, they were so subversive. They took shots at Bryan Singer. It was so fun. It was really, really fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Certainly for it. I really liked it. That's really good. I think the thing that I appreciate about X-Men that I don't think I really felt like they tapped into well enough in the previous stuff I've seen, which is like some of the movies, which is how X-Men can be an analogy for so many different like things. So obviously in the season, I really loved Roberto, because it feels like a coming out story. Whereas then there's like, I think like obviously the stuff that's like Xavier and Magneto focus is there's like racism and, you know, like the way that the X-Men can sort of like, I mean, adapt and morph into what it's
superpower. Yeah.
It is very strong. And I like the themes that they're playing with, but I feel the same way, that it's like, there's literally a moment where someone shows up and it's the ex-girlfriend of Beast. And they're just like,
Trish Tilby.
Yeah, but they just like don't say, they like kind of hold hands and they're hanging out, and I'm like, okay, I guess that there's something there, but it doesn't mean anything to me. But again, that's like not an indictment of the show. That's an indictment of like, if I want to know that stuff, that's on me to now have the opportunity to go.
Me as a 90s fan of this was of the comics too, was looking this, you go to space sometime, you know, and I was just so excited about that. So it's very exciting. Now it's not going to be representative of everybody, but I wanted to shout it out at the very least, because I know what your number one is, and your number one is very much on my top 5 list as well, and maybe a bit of a surprising number one for some people, but I love this choice from the two of you.
All right. Well, let's then discuss our actual number one. The actual number one show. This one actually took me by surprise, even more so than Baby Reindeer, which I had this show and Baby Reindeer as like mostly tied for my number one. Baby Reindeer took me by surprise because I watched the first episode and immediately fell in love. This one took me by surprise because I watched the first 2 episodes and was like, it's fine. Then I finished it and it was like, take me back. I want to go back to Italy because our number one show is Ripley.
Believe it or not.
Believe it or not.
That show
I'll just
sure was
quickly
talented.
say, I'm going to get out of here and let you do your thing. But quickly, this show was such a surprise to me. There's visually nothing like it on TV, I think. It looks so much like the icon for the Tastemakers podcast as well.
Because it's classy.
It's
Josh.
really classy.
We're classy here.
And without
And,
spoilers,
we're
someone
very talented as well.
you're both very talented.
And you can't see it if you're watching the YouTube video, but Andrew Scott, he actually is eating a television.
That's right. Yeah. You're very talented and good at eating TV. There's a thing that happens in the 3rd episode that then gets visually represented throughout the rest of the season that has not left my mind as like nightmare fuel. And I can't stop thinking about Ripley. So I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk about it.
Taran, I loved Ripley. Ripley was my number one show of the year. This is Steven Zalian, who has such an incredible body of work. He's a writer of some of his filmography is quite interesting. And he's written Schindler's List. He's written Mission Impossible. He wrote Gangs of New York. He wrote Moneyball, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I think the thing from his filmography that is very clear is that he's a go-to person to adapt content. He adapts books and writes them. And this time he got to be the showrunner. He directed every episode and wrote every episode. And this show just feels like such a gift, I think, in my opinion, that I do think there was an era where this type of stuff and the fact that Steve Zalian would choose to go and do this would be saved for a big movie screen. And it's interesting that this comes on a platform that, and I will admit, I will admit it, and it's embarrassing, but I will admit it. I watched this show, almost half of it on an airplane. Okay, Taran? It's kind of embarrassing, but I was traveling and I needed to watch Ripley and I couldn't stop watching it. I loved it so much. I think the black and white aesthetic, everything is intentional is the better way of putting that. Everything is so purposeful. The story, I think, is one that it's such a unique take. I think it's one that is, closer to the book. I went and read the book after I watched the show than I think the 1999 movie, which I think is its own sort of amazing thing. I love it, but I find that this story of this man who is he's such an enigma. I don't think he really knows who he is or what he wants to be and what he's attracted to and allured to. And I think that there is this like gloss and glamour to the 1999 Talented Mr. Ripley that this intentionally removes with it being black and white, and yet is still such a feast. And it's so visually stunning. And you layer in the story of this individual who is doing really bad things, and I think it's such a fascinating character. And Andrew Scott, I think, actually knocks it out of the park in terms of playing Tom Ripley. So I really love this thing, Taran, and I feel like our pick here for the number one is going to feel a little bit pretentious, but maybe that's okay. That the Tastemakers ends up being perceived as a little bit pretentious.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I too am talented like Ripley, and I too am in black and white.
Oh wow.
I was waiting for you to notice.
I didn't notice. You're watching the YouTube video. Yeah, Taran is black and white.
This actually is also a show based on a book that I tried to read.
Okay.
Yes. I read a good portion of The Talented Mr. Ripley, the book that this is based on, and kind of was like, it's not quite landing for me. I'm really attracted to the story, but the way it's being told, I'm not sure if I want to read this. I knew there was a movie, and I was like, maybe I'll just watch the movie.
Yeah.
The movie with Matt Damon, and the movie I did enjoy. It's very good. The show is very much not the movie.
Yeah, no.
And it couldn't be more different than the movie. If you go into the show expecting the movie, you will be disappointed, I believe. The movie is very colorful. It's very indulgent. It's very much like every time the show or every time the movie like dives into the emotional turmoil and like the drama and the extravagance, the show shies away from it. The show is much more cold and clinical. It's literally in black and white. The show is going to extend shots and scenes to the maximum amount of length that they can be. It feels sometimes like it's playing out in real time, and I got that sense for the most part when I started watching it. And I know Grace said that we weren't going to say, well, watch until this part. For me, that's what it was, and I'm not going to tell you to do that. But for me, I watched the first episode and I was kind of like, this reminds me of my experience with the book.
I actually lied. Other people will tell you this, and you should not trust that. But if we tell you to do it, you should. That's the big difference, Taran. If we're like, it's worth watching 6 hours of the show because it gets good after, if it gets good, then you should watch it because we will tell you it gets good.
Yeah. Yes. So I watched the first episode and it felt slow and it felt like it was in black and white. And I was like, this feels a little pretentious. This feels a little slow. I'm not sure. Like Andrew Scott as Ripley, like that sounds like fun to me, and he's playing it so subdued. And I just want the extravagance. I want the drama. And I was like, I'll finish it out. But I'm not sure that I'm really gonna enjoy this. And then I got to episode 3, and I was like, okay, wait. I see what they're doing now. That was incredible. And it took me a while to realize, and this is, I think, the most I will say about the show, in terms of like its plot. But it took me a while to realize that this show, Ripley, is Dexter. It's you. If you liked Dexter, if you liked you, I think that there is an avenue for you to really like this show. It's kind of like the classier version of those shows that like tries to be a little more, a little less indulgent, I would say, again, in terms of like how those shows can get a little indulgent. And what I really like about it is that like it really draws you in. The visuals are incredible, even in black and white. And I just get so lost in the world that it presents, that genuinely, like I said when I started talking about the show, when I finished the season, I was like, take me back. I want to see more people walking the streets of Italy, climbing steps with puddles of rain on them.
There's
like
more books. There's more books, Taran, that you didn't read.
Exactly.
Yeah, Patricia Highsmith's. There's more of them.
This show is not for everyone.
I agree. It is very slow. It's paced, and I think the way I feel pretentious about this sometimes is there's an aspect to the show of the way that it's not the movie is that it is not glam, it's not glitz, and there's a level of which what Ripley wants out of his life and what he does, what he chooses to do to try and get that, I think is so interesting, because then when you see it, it's like, really, like this is what he wants. Like the show does have like, these it's filmed in, I think this is the other reason Steven Zaley was like, can I do this? He just went and filmed in Italy for forever. Like it is gorgeous, but there's also a way in which like everything is so muted that it's like he's really doing it for like this in a way that I think in the movie, like I think it could kind of be like, I mean, I'm not going to commit murder to do this stuff, but like maybe, like it's like it seems pretty fun, and in a way that the show does not want you to feel. And then there's this tension of like, can he get away with it? The other thing that I think is really interesting about the book, and I don't remember whether the movie does this and then whether the show does, But choosing to have Ripley not be a narrator, I think, is a really good choice, because I think the idea of not actually being inside of Ripley's head is such an important piece of this show, and wondering why he's making decisions he is, in a way that the book is telling you, that I feel like is almost like less compelling, because Ripley is such an enigma. So I really, really enjoy the show. Again, I know that it might feel like it's like a little bit of the like, not, we didn't pick Shogun as our #1 show, or even Fallout, which I feel like might have been the bigger shows. And I do still feel the unfortunate thing of like a show that gets dropped in a binge is, I do feel like this show was recognized when it came out as being very good, but I feel like already there's a little bit of like, Ripley might be lost to time, and I really hope not, because I would like it to come back. So I think it's the perfect pick for us, Taran.
Yeah, it's a really rewarding show if you are willing to invest a little attention. It is definitely not a show that you can put on in the background. So much of it is like, so much of the character work is like small facial tics and like little subtle moments, and and really to get the most out of it, you need to be like actively watching. And that's why I think for the most part it's not necessarily for everyone, but I do think it is very good if you buy into it and if you really like this kind of show. So that is our #1 pick. And I will stop being black and white now.
Do you have one honorable mention? I can give one honorable mention. I would have put on my list if we weren't, scripted TV. I think I would have indulged myself and put John Mulaney's Everybody's in LA on my list. One of my favorite things that happened this year. But technically, I mean, a lot of it, some of it is scripted, but I did not think it qualified as a variety talk show to make my list. But one of my favorite things I watched so far this year. Do you have anything that might have cracked your list?
There were a couple things that I was looking at. I really liked The Sympathizer. I was hoping that it would be better.
Yeah.
Park Chan-wook, my favorite director, and I like his TV shows, but they don't quite
he dipped
land.
out a little bit too. He doesn't direct all the episodes. I think that's a fair critique of The Sympathizer.
I also liked I did like Mr. and Mrs. Smith. That was another controversial one, a very polarizing response to Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I really enjoyed it for much of its run. I wasn't a huge fan of the ending, but I did enjoy its brand of like sort of character study. So that was a fun one for me.
I liked how different it was from the movie, and then I didn't like it as it got more like the movie.
Yeah.
So that is not that I think the movie is bad, but I really liked that they were trying something different until they weren't trying something different. I like that. I really like Three Body Problem. I know there's like problems with it, I think more than maybe three. And I think at some point we'll have to talk about what the heck is happening over at Netflix, that they were like, we're definitely going to make more. And then suddenly it was like, you're doing 3 seasons. I think that's very interesting that we'll have to chat about at some point. But those are future Three Body Problems for us to talk about, Taran.
Yeah, Three Body Problem for me was a show that I was like, okay, now I'll get to see Dan and Dave, who made Game of Thrones. I'll get to see them adapting a show that is a book that is fully written, the series, and see what they're made of. And I think for me, what Three Body Problem showed me was that it was them. They were the problem.
Yeah, I don't think
that was me though. That's me. I also really did like The Gentleman, Guy Ritchie show, based on his movie.
I tried an episode, Taran. I don't know.
I thought it was fun. It didn't always hit, but when it did, I thought it was a good time.
Taran, I think more importantly than some of the honorable mentions, I think it has been a great TV year so far. Josh Wigler was talking about that like he would have put some of the things not just in his top TV shows of this year, but of the last few years, which I think is interesting. I don't know that I'm quite there. I don't know that anything is like this has been really good TV. On the other hand, I think the rest of the year is such an interesting smattering of television that is coming that I think is so interesting. Obviously, there's a big one, which we shall get to in terms of how we're going to cover it. But The Bear is coming. Severance is coming. Arcane season 2 is coming. Squid Game, supposedly, season 2 is coming. Dune Prophecy, which I'm very excited for, is coming. Rings of Power, season 2 is coming. The Boys, season 4 is coming. There's a lot of TV that I think could potentially make our end of the year list, which I presume we shall do. By the time
let's make a couple of quick predictions, because I think Squid Game season 2 is going to flop.
Interesting. I mean, the best show of the year is going to be The Penguin, Taran. That's gonna be the best.
There you
That's gonna
go.
be the
The thing, like, I think people will watch Squid Game because there's still a big audience, but like, anytime you try to continue a story that is so specific like that, it's just I don't know how they're gonna do it. I will be very impressed if they manage it because it doesn't happen.
I'm with you. I think the other thing that their Netflix reporting showed that Squid Game, the challenge, the reality show drew, I believe, like a 60% increase in viewership on Squid Game.
Yeah.
So that after it was like a breakout hit, it then like drove traffic to be people watching the show again. So that's fascinating. And I think expectations are high for Squid Game season 2. The Acolyte is happening right now as well, which has a star from Squid Game. And it's been kind of interesting so far. Watched a couple episodes, but Lee Jung Jae in the Acolyte, and then we'll be in Squid Game. I agree with you. I think it could be tough for them to nail a season 2, but we'll see.
We will see. Well, of course, the biggest show coming soon, very soon at this point, is House of the Dragon season 2. Very excited. I really enjoyed House of the Dragon season 1. I really feel like this is, in terms of like Dan and Dave over there making 3 Body Problem, and some of the people who worked on Game of Thrones working on House of the Dragon, I feel like the talent stayed at HBO, and they're making some good stuff. I think House of the Dragon was it was very well received. Lots of people watched it. It was a little controversial in terms of the way it was telling its story, and some of the time jumps in season 1. I don't believe that that's a concern for season 2. I think that if you liked Game of Thrones, which most people did, at least when it was good, House of the Dragon season 2 is where it should really start kicking into gear and feel even more Game of Thronesy. So I'm excited for House of the Dragon, and in fact, I'm so excited for House of the Dragon. We are going to talk about House of the Dragon, not on this exact podcast, not on Tastemakers. This is
we might mention it here.
TV.
We might have a dash of House of the Dragon, but yeah.
But if you are interested in more in-depth coverage for specific shows that we are interested in covering, then we will do that. And so we will have an additional podcast each week that House of the Dragon is on, where we will recap the episode. And then on this podcast, we can still talk about House of the Dragon. We're not going to like recap the episode. We're just going to be talking about maybe the response to the episode, what else is happening in the world of TV while House of the Dragon is on. If you want House of the Dragon specific content, you can head over to that podcast, and we will be doing a preview for House of the Dragon season 2, which will include a recap of what you need to know from season 1, which I think more shows should do a better job of, because their previously on thing is terrible. It's just like 30 seconds of random scenes that doesn't get me caught up on anything.
No.
I read the book, watched the season, and I need a refresher on what happened. So so it'll be a little bit of that, a little bit of preview for what's to come and what we can maybe expect, and then we will be covering it weekly after the episode airs on Sundays.
Yes, we know House of the Dragon. We'll give you the recap. I've rewatched the season and I reread the book. Taran, I thought I actually went back and was like, that thing I maybe didn't like when I first watched it, maybe I actually do like it now. But I could just be completely in the bag for House of the Dragon, because I'm very excited for it to return. We shall see. Very excited that we're going to be covering it weekly. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's what we have for you then here this week, the first week of the Tastemakers. Hopefully you enjoyed. This is a little bit of a different format than what we will normally do, as I mentioned. From here forward, we will be talking about the latest, what's coming out, what we're watching, what you can be watching. Again, the idea is that when I started listening to podcasts about television, particularly post-show recaps, our sort of predecessor at this point, what I really loved about it was that they would cover a show and I would watch the show. And they kind of helped keep me directed toward these shows. They're the reason I watched The Leftovers, which became one of my favorite shows of all time. And then television just got so big, and there were so many podcasts and so many shows. And so the idea here is we're trying to narrow it down a little bit more. We're trying to get back to a place where hopefully you can come on a journey with us and we'll all watch some TV together and talk about it and have a good time along the way.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I obviously love talking about TV, and I'm very excited to get to talk about it with you, Taran, and have Josh Wigler in our ear the whole time, just buzzing around in the background. Should be very fun. that's Josh Wigler buzzing around. I'm very excited. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is people should let us know what they are watching, because it will help us inform what we should be watching. We're gonna have our eyes on everything, but if we sort of like, there is so much TV, and what I really want is those like little hidden gems. I want to know, like, what's out there that I really wouldn't maybe otherwise have eyes on. I think we'll do a pretty good job of knowing what's hitting. But if you have anything, you can comment in the YouTube section. You can message us on Twitter. Anyway, you can sort of engage with us and let you know what we're watching. Tastemakers, RHAP@gmail.com. You can also email us any of your feedback, recommendations, anything like that. If you disagree with us, I mean, you're wrong, but we'll read it.
Please pitch us shows. Like, tell us why we should give a show that we didn't like another shot. Like, be a part of the conversation. I think it's very helpful. Again, we're trying to like get that window of shows that it's possible to watch in a certain time frame, and we want to find the best of those.
And June's busy, Taran. June is busy. There's House of the Dragon, The Bear, The Boys, The Acolyte, the Bridgerton. I think the next part comes out. There's a lot of TV already. More B shows. More normally S shows on Apple TV, but you got B shows over here.
All right.
We're only talking about the A shows. We're only talking about the A shows.
Maybe our producer Josh can come in and tell you all of the places you can find this podcast. He knows all the things.
You can listen to the Tastemakers each and every week when you subscribe to RHAP. We Know Scripted TV on your podcast player of choice. You could also check out robhasawebsite.com/scripted for more about where you can subscribe to the podcast. robhasawebsite.com/subscribe to just subscribe to all of the amazing things that are happening RHAP wide. And of course, check out RHAP We Know Scripted TV on YouTube to watch video versions of these podcasts. And you can get all of this information in your handy dandy show notes each and every week. Taran, was that good? It
was great.
Okay, cool. I'm going to sign off again. Bye.
Okay. So thank you all once again. We'll be back next week with more Tastemakers. We'll also be back soon with some House of the Dragon coverage. But this is a new journey we're taking, and hopefully you'll come along with us. And that's what we have for you. So for Grace, I'm Taran Armstrong. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.